And I think Kali and Saki know what I will say. I'll whisper to them. Okay, so, but I do always like them to hear again and again how honored I am. I've done a lot of work as an editor and a writer over the decades. I do a lot of work with PM Press. I'll speak a little bit about that in a moment. But it's always an honor to work with leaders of the Black Liberation Movement, leaders of the Puerto Rican movements, there are movements around us. And in my estimate, as a longtime activist and strategic organizer, the experiments that have been going on for some time and have, in the best nature of radical organizing, been looked at internally and re-looked at and re-examined and shifted and changed, even since the initiation, since the beginning of Operation Jackson. That kind of continuing reflective analysis and reorganizing based on analysis is really exemplified in Cooperation Jackson and the experiments that that crew have been doing in Jackson, Mississippi. So I think we have a lot to learn from Cooperation Jackson, in Jackson, in the Southeast and regionally, in organizing in the US and internationally. Most of my work is done internationally, and I don't believe that it's just an easy thing or even really an acceptable thing to replicate models here, there, and there. You know, you need to, we need to, all of us, create models as close to local organizing as possible. Nonetheless, there are certain types of local organizing that have begun to think through things about what it means to not have amnesia in 2023, about what it means to really look at the legacy of the past and build on it for today. Again, the subtitle of the book, Lessons on Building the Future in the Present. It is in some ways, as a mainly Pan-Africanist, this Sankofa notion. We look back in order to move forward. It's an Akan, West African Sankofa notion. We look back to look forward and to move forward. And Cooperation Jackson does that. The book itself.
What's your name? Sorry.
Oh, right. Good. Thank you.
People on the list.
My name is Matt Meyer.
Matt Meyer, okay.
And I'm honored to be a co-editor of this book with Kali Akuno. And since, they're not here, it's good I can say all kinds of things. So really, Sacajawea Hall, and they'll see the tape, I hope. I'm really glad it's being videotaped, so I can say you need to see that first 5 minutes you missed. But Sacajawea Hall, in many, many ways, should be a co-editor. We fought, Kali and I, and Kali and Saki are also a married couple in addition to co-founders of Cooperation Jackson, and they're also very much individual forces in the work and in the movement. But in many ways, Sacajawea contributed key parts of this book, and I expect that she'll talk about this. We've done really very few events together. It's very hard to get the three of us in the same room together. Our schedules are crazy. But we did the first launch of the book on May Day, May 1st, in Jackson, Mississippi. We did an event several days later in New Orleans, and this is really our third event together, though we've obviously worked together for years and years. But I want to mention Sacajawea, especially Saki, because her chapters in this book have consistently gotten the kind of focus and recognition that most of the rest of the book have not gotten. And I think the whole book is worthy and valuable. And I think it looks at the Jackson experiment historically in a contemporary form, regionally and internationally. But Saki's chapter really take that kind of hard-hitting, the behind-the-scenes bad stuff you don't ever really want to hear. Like, it's sort of like painful to hear, oh my God, they had that trouble there, they're dealing with that crisis there, there's sectarian messes there, yes. And we're going to struggle with it, and we're going to speak honestly about it. and I'm gonna try to build from it anyway, yes. And so really, I credit Sacajawea as a very much 1/3 of, this book, even though Kali and I get to have our names on the cover. But I will take a moment to say something about myself, which is what I was gonna do anyway. As someone who's not from Jackson, Mississippi, as someone who's not, part of the Black liberation movement, as a white ally, and as someone who comes at the work and our relationship of one of solidarity and leadership. And I guess I wanted to start my remarks in any case today by saying a little something about Howard Zinn and someone else, which talks about my trajectory and my trajectory in this book. I forgot to bring a prop. I have props. I have show and tell items. It's much better than PowerPoints. It's just real and live. But one of my most favorite beautiful props is, I left it downstairs. Okay, you'll imagine it. I'll show you where to look at it, and then you'll go downstairs and you can see it yourself later. Okay, so anyway, this is me and my trajectory. So I was born and raised in New York, third generation, not from radical parents. I was radicalized as a late teen in the late 1970s and 1980s. I'm a slightly different generation than the veterans that were here at the last panel, and some of you young people here. It's excellent to be in that sort of in-between space. But growing up, I got to meet and know a little bit Howard Zinn, and of course was influenced by the people's history of the United States. But I think it's also important to note that I try to find a copy down there. It's not one of my publishers that have put his book into print, but there's another author that I also learned early in my years, in the early 1980s, about the United States and its history. And it's an author named J, just the initial J, Sakai, S-A-K-A-I. And his book, Settlers, The Myth of the White Proletariat. And this book, Settlers, was important because it was in many ways, for many of us, an entire sector of the anti-imperialist movements, a way of looking at Zinn and a people's history with a slightly different edge. It didn't really dispute Zinn, but it took a different position in terms of what the white working class meant, what white solidarity meant and means, and what anti-imperialism, the US as a prison house of nations, as an imperial center more than a nation state, means. And I think there's relevance to our work today. It's certainly relevance in terms of my interaction with Corporation Jackson. Yeah, I started. They asked me to start. They asked me to start. What am I going to do? Can we at least bring these guys in with a nice little kind of I mean, we're all ready, so they might as well be brought in, right? That's the way it is.
Well, it's my fault. Y'all can blame me. I had 1:30 in my schedule.
I didn't tell them that.
And I told.
I kept that. I kept that back.
Well, I'm just letting y'all know I had 1:30 in my
This is what I
schedule.
was talking about in terms of revolutionary honesty and being clear. And your chapter, Saki, in the book. I'll finish. I'll be done soon. You can catch your breath. You get about 3-4 minutes. Well, 5 minutes. I mean, knowing me, probably 6 minutes. Okay, anyway. So the thing about Settlers and the thing about that book set me on a path of looking at and understanding white radicalism and solidarity and empire in a different way. So that, for example, it meant, remember I said show and tell, right? It meant having a somewhat different relationship. I started out primarily working with nonviolent organizations in the peace movement, which I'm still very connected with, but it meant a different relationship to the Panthers. So when we put out this book, also PM Press some years ago, with Panther 21, New York Panthers, radicals, still militants. And we decided not just to put an old book, a classic book, Look for Me in the Whirlwind, back into print, but also to look at the relevance, the legacy of the Panthers today. That's what we produced here. And by the way, I took this, it wasn't part of my show and tell, but our friends at PM Press said I had to bring this too. Not because I think it has direct relevance to the things I'm going to say are necessary in this book, but because part of the Corporation Jackson experiment is in honoring this guy's name and having a quasi-Baldwin Center at Corporation Jackson. So this book is here as well. But it also meant that looking at Panther legacy, Malcolm's legacy, and organizing in the 21st century meant looking at different strategies, strategic reflections and reevaluations of the work, and solidarity with the work wherever it was being done. So the Malcolm X Grassroots movement, which Kali was a central part of for many years, the looking at what it meant to build in the South, in the territories, that some consider New Africa, in any case, majority black population, that the idea that there's always been something about the South in the US that had a certain primacy. And again, the panel before this one had SNCC, and SNCC was a national organization, but it was a national organization that was rooted in the US South. So whether you're in that SNCC, Martin Luther King, whether you're Malcolm X, New African, any tendency you're looking at, a primacy for movements of social change of all kind, and the US South and the Black Liberation Movement is central. And that's, again, as a young white radical, something I came to understand and learn, in part because some of those books I was talking about. So then, knowing Kali, knowing Saki, knowing these experiments that were happening here, both just before and after Chokwe Lumumba Sr. was elected mayor, not president.
Yeah,
That's a different election, man. That's a whole different book. But even the idea of having this militant, this radical, profoundly brilliant lawyer, but no one who had based most of his life on electoral politics fundamentally, but rather on grassroots radical community organizing and legal work to free wrongly imprisoned people in the movement. To run a campaign, which they'll talk more about, to become mayor, a successful campaign that was also about transforming this capital city of the poorest state in the nation, really a different place. And again, what the nation is versus the empire is its own complicated thing. So understanding Chokwe and Corporation Jackson in those early years, then Stokely's untimely passing, then his son's becoming mayor, all of this is part of the Jackson experiment and its evolution and changing nature. And I guess the last thing I wanted to say by way of my introduction in terms of working into this question of solidarity, and here's the graphic I really meant. I'm doing show and tell. I talked about settlers and my understanding of, white settlerism, and they don't have a copy of Sakai's book downstairs. But PM Press does have a puzzle. It's a really cool big puzzle. You can get it for $30. Look at their table downstairs, and it's a cat. It's a very cool cat. It's a drawing by Eric Drucker, who's also going to be here later today. And it says General Strike. So go downstairs and look at it. Imagine your heads now, red and black, of course, and General Strike. Because when the pandemic happened, when COVID-19 became a thing, the idea of calling for a people's strike became another level of mass organizing that was rooted in and called for by Corporation Jackson, but affected many of us, myself included, as a New York organizer. I won't, you have to buy the book to hear the end of the story. Oh, no, wait, the story's not over yet. But the fact of the matter is we did not have a massive general strike and shut down the US, in case you weren't noticing that. But the mobilizing, see, I give in little giveaways, you still have to buy the book. But the fact of the matter is the mobilizing for a people's strike, with its successes and failures, was part of the idea of building the networks we need to do the kind of solidarity we're looking for, the kind of local grassroots change we're looking to build, and the kind of movement that we think will have some teeth in withstanding some of the struggles of 2023, 24, 25, again, building the future in the presence. That's my introduction. You've heard me now. Please again help me welcome, and we get to hear from the folks who are at the center of the storm. Sacajawea Hall and Kali Akuno. It's so great to be with you again.
Oh, okay, all right. So give us just a quick second to get our bearings. But glad you all could make it, spend a little bit of your time, connecting with us. Where to begin, kind of on this journey. I think Matt covered some of the rationale behind the book, but let me just add, we want to convey as much of the experience for kind of collective growth and knowledge of our little experiment for others to share, learn from, pick up from, right? There is no cookie cutter kind of solution, so you're not going to do anywhere kind of exactly the same things we did in Jackson. But I think there are some general principles, hopefully you can kind of glean from many of the chapters of some of the things that we have done right, and then, do some of the reflection on some of the things that we haven't been as successful at executing, and all the kind of the changes that go with it. And this is an ongoing experiment. I want everybody to have a clear understanding of that. And by my reckoning, Saki has a little dispute with my logic on this question, but by my reckoning, we kind of just completed what I consider the second phase of our growth, right? And that's both in terms of the infrastructure we've been able to develop, where we at in actual kind of like leadership development, community, base building. I think we're at the end. And part of this end is, oddly enough, how I kind of counted up, there's, and I'm just talking about Cooperation Jackson. If I was doing the overall Jackson Kush plan, it would be another level of assessment. But just for us, there was the founding, which was in 2014, roughly till about 2018. That was kind of phase one, which was first level of just acquiring a lot of land, getting the Balagoon Center kind of up and running, getting the co-ops, in some motion. And then the second phase was like dealing with some of the contradictions of the first phase, and then building on that. And this third phase is going to be the trickiest in many respects.
Okay, so you're saying we're going into the third.
We're going into the third. And I think this third phase is going to be the trickiest. And let me say,
one of the chairs over there, I think. It's okay. Oh, okay. Thank you.
If the woman, or the person got up, you could say,
Yeah, but they're still, Claudette still needs to check.
you didn't chair Paulette?
Oh, I said
Prioritize.
Claudette.
right.
I'm almost never prioritized.
Well, here you are.
All right, so so phase two was kind of, it's like getting our feet wet. Phase one's kind of getting our feet wet. Phase two is a level of consolidation, just to kind of summarize. And one of the things about a project like ours, we've been very fortunate enough, and I think both through planning, both through I think sufficient organizing, and I think through having strong networks throughout this empire and solid comrades, we've been able to just starting with the physical infrastructure, we've been able to really develop our community land trust and acquire the community land trust to this point without any debt. So everything, and y'all are all welcome to come check us out. But everything that you see, we own outright, right? It's all part of the community land trust owned by Cooperation Jackson's nonprofit. And we honestly got a boost from the George Floyd rebellion. I think like a lot of forces did. We ain't got the millions of dollars some other folks did, but we got a little boost. And I think we put that to most strategic use. Over the past 10 years, roughly about 60% of all the resources that have ever passed through our hands have gone into acquiring land. And that's very much in line with the objective that myself and many others went down there for, and folks who live down there have been about within our movement, which is about freeing the land. Now, this is not freeing it, but it is a way of kind of acquiring us to have a level of base and something we can pass on to future generations to do programmatic work. And we'll talk about that in line of some of our thinking about, for me, I'll just put it this way. For me, a large part of this project from day one has been like, how do you build something that could withstand at least for a period of time, a level of attack similar to what we're seeing in Gaza. And I don't mean to bullshit about that. That has always been part of kind of my personal thinking. I don't know about collective thinking, but personal thinking. But the acquiring land to a certain degree has been easy. And that may sound weird to y'all because y'all in a place where land costs $1 million an inch damn near. But, you know, in our context, you know, the prices are going up. In the nature of capitalism, quite frankly, certain levels of our success, we're actually part of the force which is now driving prices up on land.
Yeah.
Right? We can make phone calls and people, the gentrifying forces, will tell you, oh, there's this nice arts project and there's these nice buildings and they're talking about our work, which is you know like a force that's kind of attractive to other forces of capital at this point, right? Totally ironic, but that's you know how this beast operates, how vicious it is. But this third phase, in part, why it's going to be more difficult. Two things, you know, we are trying to do a certain level of much more intentional leadership transition and development. You know, I think that despite all the hard effort and kind of sacrifice, there is a particular, I'm not gonna call it a contradiction, but there is a issue in that, you know, I'm from LA originally, Saki's from New York. We're not from Jackson, Mississippi. You know, we very much committed to it, 100%, but developing, anchoring, you know, uplifting local leadership is part of this next phase. And that's harder than it sometimes appears for a number of different reasons. Not so much about resources, although that's a part of it. But one of the things that you know, we experienced in a particular way about Chokwe and his passing, which Matt mentioned, you know, some experiences can't be replicated, right? No matter what you do, you're gonna be a product of your era. That brings out certain qualities, certain things, and I think that's true of us on a certain level. So passing certain things on is more than just a kind of academic notion, but it's something we're gonna try. But you also got to be willing, and this is part of for me been one of these kind of dynamics. Given some of the struggles that we had, I've been very dogmatic at times, and I'm not ashamed to say that about. Now, this is what the mission is, and we ain't deviating towards this or that or all this other kind of stuff. You know, this is about freeing the land. It ain't about making nobody personally rich or, you know, experiment with these corporations. We ain't doing that. We're doing this, you know. And I think it's good to hold that position, but it can be also wind up being very undemocratic, like kind of holding the vision in a particular way that doesn't allow other things to grow. So there's a part of like now, all right, I think we firmly in place. All of the final pieces are in place, and at least for me, it's like it's time to kind of play a new role. I'm not going anywhere, but play a new role, which is hopefully just be kind of like on the board and like fundraising and making sure for the next generation at least there's enough money there for them to operate for like 4 or 5 years without having to stress and strain and do that kind of stuff. We'll see if that's going to be possible. But the other piece is, we at a phase now where we are rightly getting some criticism from the community, like y'all got a lot of land, but only a small portion of it is being, rehabilitated. So what y'all gonna do about that, right? And so we gotta answer that question. And we've kind of come to this space where we can't do that in the way of, making some money here, saving some money, it's self-financing.
Yeah.
We can't do that, right? We are at that cutoff limit. So we're gonna have to try to experiment now finally with finding some way to take out loans. And that's gonna be a different strain and stress, on the forces of the ground. There's a different set of questions that they're gonna have to come in. But I'm sharing all that to say is that, I think one of the good things over the last 4 or 5 years, there's a bunch of experiments that are taking place throughout the country that, at least in name, are drawing from us, and we think that's a good thing. But we definitely want to pass on the lessons of like, there's some things we did right, and some things we made some terrible assessments on, and some things we assumed that we had more unity than we really did on certain in certain ways, in certain perspective. We've had to kind of, I think, mature into a level of being clear about what our differences are, but still in the context of fighting, open white supremacy, which is what Mississippi don't hide that from nobody. How we still got to work with each other because like we got differences, but we ain't each other's enemy. We got, that's the enemy. And being very clear about what that is, but then also being like, making certain compromises with capital or making certain compromises. We're gonna have to struggle with y'all on that, too, and y'all need to struggle with us where we wrong. So that's the phase I think we're at. But all that to say, that's why we wanted to write this book, right, and put this out. And hopefully, elements of it could be helpful in terms of, how do you think about strategy? I think we've learned a few things there that I think could be helpful, like how you do certain elements of applying the strategy, right? How do you make certain assessment about, what the balance of forces are locally in your area? I think there's some things in there that I would definitely, draw people to infer from that would be helpful to forces wherever you may be. You may come up with a totally different program. Ultimately, you're gonna have to, but like how to put it together. And then, last piece that we want to do is like there's a way in which we're not just trying to build islands of like little retreat centers or small little bubbles of utopia. That's not the point. The point is like this is where I can have a practical impact. This is where we can build a certain amount of power. Like the red area, base area. This is kind of the conception of it. But ultimately, it's got to link up with other folks doing other work so we can make a direct impact, and a challenge to the empire. So please read it with kind of that perspective in mind and judge us by that criteria, where we've succeeded and where we failed.
Yeah, which also involves the invitation to visit, right? And I think the other part to piggyback on where Kali is leaving off is of it being an exchange and a dialogue. And so we want people to be able to not only engage in like the theory and the strategy and how it applies in different places, or is a challenge in different places, but like for us to be able to connect so that we can expand in so many places.
Could you speak up just a little bit?
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Little
And I'm very stuffy right now. Did you hear some of it?
Yeah, I heard it all.
Oh, okay.
I'm struggling.
Okay, thank you. But to be able to connect and create ecosystems, in our local spaces, but that we have very intentional interaction and exchanges, because to me, that's the real way that we can shift dynamics, right? And like the balance of power. And so, it's not necessarily about scaling up, but scaling out. So I'm Sacajawea Hall. Most people know me and call me Saki. I use she, her pronouns. I'm one of the co-founders of Cooperation Jackson. We made the decision together because we are a family and have a family to stop going back and forth between Atlanta and Jackson and move to Jackson, which for me, I was excited about it, and I was also like, that was not a part of my plan at all. And so, it's just interesting how, because my father is from St. Louis and Black, and my mom's from Haiti, that like my connection to the South was way less experiential than it was kind of like a knowing that like that's where my ancestors, like at least in this part of the land, started. And so that, and I wasn't planning on starting off with that, but that was is what's coming to me right now, and that was a serious challenge. And so for me, writing and being a part of the second book was really important to share more so my experience and what can be gleaned from it, as opposed to trying to contribute to other parts of it, even though I am in other parts and collaborated in one of the earlier chapters with Kali, because it really has been hard. And so, early on moving to Jackson, I had just had my son, and so being a parent even being a woman, you know, despite all of the knowing and the consciousness, and then like trying to, you know, hit up against stuff that the patriarchy and whatnot that comes up, is a challenge in terms of how you contribute to the work, right? And then also, you know, I felt like mostly an affirmation of being able to commit or later on commit class suicide, because I went from, you know, being a child of an immigrant and, you know, being privileged enough, even though, you know, my family and my mother is like started off working class, to be able to go to college. And so like the decision to not only move to Jackson, but to be in Jackson and to be in West Jackson, and to raise our family in that particular part of Jackson, you know, was also, I think, played a role in, and was different than a lot of folks do now, unless you like go back to your neighborhood or in that neighborhood and continue, you know, growing and becoming an organizer or activist. A lot of folks, a lot of us who have been able to like do college end up, I think, organizing and doing work with, even if it's with our like base of original community outside of that community, right? And so part of like how I want to end is sharing one section of the book and reading some parts of it for you all. But so yeah, so like the working in the South, not being from the South, obviously as soon as my mouth opens up, you know, and then like in the Deep South, it's even, to me, it's even deeper in terms of the roots that you do or don't have, because folks are able to talk about how their grandmothers, you know, were teachers together, and like people ask you about your last name. And so I think that like, you know, part of the challenge was and still is getting over that hurdle and the disconnect of you're not from here. And so, you know, I like what you're doing, but that's not necessarily enough of an impetus for us to commit in the same way that you're asking people to commit to, right? And so I think Kali's talking about the phases. I think, you know, the whole part of it, and we came into it thinking that there was already a set like base, but it wasn't as developed and as strong as it really needed to be for us to enter into and not have to play the kind of role where we're the face of it, and having to prove ourselves, right? So, you know, early on when we started, we had a limited amount of people who had like full-time availability and capacity to work on it, and so we played a lot of different hats. And then what I ended up shifting into, which I think also plays into like being a woman in this work, not even necessarily a Black woman, is like what type of the work we end up doing, right? And so so I shifted into being more focused on the operations. So I'm the operations director, which includes like HR and includes administration and includes finance. And it's like, yeah, I'm good with all those things. And I can accept that I'm the strongest one who could be like an internal bookkeeper. I've been stuck in that role, right? And that like very much also includes the care work and the like, the group care work. And most of the time when people see or want to talk about the work of an organization, and this like movement building, all of that is in the background so much that it's almost, you know, invisible. And at the same time, like it wouldn't function without it, right? Like it can't exist without it. And so thinking about where we're at and what we need to even shore up on and strengthen on, I think that all of us, and us in particular, need to make sure that we're uplifting the role and how critical that is, and even how it helps create like a safety net when the state wants to be able to use something when they can't use other things as like your finances, right? And like come in and like folks are trying to throw criticism around how you're managing resources, which we've definitely received. The other major part of the work, I think, is more visible, and at the same time, we really do, I think, in this phase, have to step up. I'm the point person and really coordinate the Fannie Lou Hamer Community Land Trust.
She got like 10 jobs.
I mean, yeah, so like those are the two parts, but like, of course, obviously, there's more than that, right? Like flying to places and meeting and talking to people like you, and the travel that takes us away from being on the ground, and then having to figure out like childcare support to be able to do those things. So the Fannie Lou Hamer Community Land Trust is really exciting. And early on, when we all started getting trained more in like thinking concretely around cooperative housing and thinking concretely around the community land trust as a tool that can be used in this country, because the legal structure and framework, even if it's not exactly on the books in Mississippi, exists, right? And all of that I realized early on was my experience coming full circle as a person who grew up in the Lower East Side of New York, where the divestment and the circumstances led to people having absentee landlords, having some landlords, and having to collectively deal with their housing, whether something breaks and having to fix it, or even just like, democratically and in a collective way sharing in order to like keep roofs over their heads. And at a certain point, because of some folks in the Bronx, the New York City agreed to and created this program where a number of housing in the Lower East Side and in the South Bronx shifted into limited liability housing, and cooperative housing, basically, right? And so I came to realize in my late 30s that at a certain point, not only did I grow up with community in a neighborhood and on a block and in the the chunk of like 4 buildings, to get even more micro, that did things like, sharing the sugar seems like a real cliche example of what people talk about, but at a certain point, like I learned that they were like exchanging and sharing food stamps, right? And those are things that we might not be talking about it in terms of food stamps, but those are the things that we're talking about in terms of sharing, in terms of bartering, in terms of collecting into like a pool and having everybody cared for. And so not only that was visible and I could see those things, but apart from that, like it shifted into us owning our apartments, us continuing to collectively manage the building, and going through a process where legally we were democratically running and owning our housing. And so that made me feel like really good, because I felt like this has been a part of my experience, and I think that it has definitely like led me to want to continue doing that and having that be something that's available to everyone. And at the same time, like how concrete the connection was really affirmed me early on. And so although a group of us were doing this, I really wanted to like be at the center of the land and housing work, and oftentimes start off acknowledging like our ancestors. And I think a lot of names came up when I came in that Matt was using, like Malcolm X talking about land being the basis of self-determination. Like early on, we were clear that no matter what would happen and could happen with folks wanting to give us money, we had to be able to actually steward. I'm going to say steward as opposed to own, but really in this context, it's owning. right? To be able to steward land, even at the expense of us paying ourselves. And so we've been able to acquire, we're like over 43 pieces of property now, and we see the community land trust in trying to build consciousness around cooperative housing and cooperative building management, because for us it's multi use. So it's not only about housing, but it's about commercial space. It's about whatever, for me early on, I was like, we need some parks. We need to just throw something together on this empty plot that we have here, but to figure out how do we develop, what do we need, and how do we create that? And so we have a really big opportunity because we've been able to acquire, and we prioritize that. We have a really big opportunity to do that, and to do that in relationship to everybody who lives there and who has been living there. And at the same time, like Kali said, the self-financing is a struggle because it required us for this shopping plaza down the block from our base to have every part of the roof replaced. And for us to come up with doing it in phases, and for us to have to hold off even being able to have tenants, so the plaza is like 1/5 occupied, to be able to have tenants, because that work of repairing those things have to happen, right? So like this past 2 to 3 years really, for the CLT has been going in and making sure that we do the repair and the renovations so that they, are there and they last and they don't continue to dilapidate. But we haven't really been able to move to the phase that we want to get to, where the vacant land is being, more productive. There's not funding, and the funding is a little shaky in terms of our politics to be able to like build housing from scratch and look at the different technology and innovation opportunities that we also have with our Fab Lab, right? And to mix being able to 3D print and being able to use traditional carpentry and electricity and plumbing, and to merge those things. But like, we haven't gotten there yet, and we need to get there. We want to get there. The capacity to be able to at least temporarily use them for farming has been a challenge. So really, it's been like 3 plots, and sometimes that has been a struggle for us to grow on. But I think that like we're ready for this shift in this next phase. And so that opportunity is still there and still very ripe. And we need support, not only in like financial support and donations, but like folks who are willing to come. One of the houses that we finally were able to, have one of our members who's a tenant get into, it took, 2.5 years, was because the first 2 rounds of the renovation and the repair work and really having to gut this house was provided with volunteer labor of folks who had those skills. Some of the people didn't have the skills, but they were learning from the people who did. And one of them was just construction, and then symbiosis came, and then like the kind of like roundup was done by our local folks that we've been able to establish a relationship with, like a general contractor and other people. But I also wanted to touch base on what Kali said in terms of the struggle and trying to shift into different roles, and not the dynamic of power with leadership that comes when you've been the one to start something and you've been the one to hold, even if you're trying to hold it in like a collective leadership and consensus model, like there's still, we can't get rid of that kind of like overarching systems of oppression that have socialized us in such a way that we even like individually and as a group hold ourselves back, right? And so like that mindset and like having to develop and kind of like strengthen, I guess, like a class consciousness has been really hard. So like people still use the word boss. The other day I was like, I looked at one person and I was like, did you just say I was the boss? And the deep need, especially early on, for people to actually have a job. So it's like, oh, okay, that sounds great. do you have a job? Can I have a job? And then on top of that, there's the what's the word? The cult, I'm gonna say right now, of leadership, right? And so it's like, who do you go to when you really want to talk about something deep, you know? Kali. And you know, so even in group spaces, if we're doing political education or we're just even having a meeting, it's kind of like, it's like having to work really hard. And then even, and you know, we don't always get this right either. I think it's important for us to be talking about how we do this better, how we distribute skills, knowledge, and people's willingness to actually see themselves as leaders who can speak towards what they're doing and what we're doing, as much as either of us. And you know, people coming in at different points, agreeing with and wanting to support the vision, but not necessarily as seeing themselves as the vision holders, right? And that for me right now is really big. And I'm going through this like leadership process and thinking about how do we consistently revisit in a way where we're not reshaping so much unless it like really there's something broken, but revisiting and agreeing to and committing to what the vision and therefore the priorities are. I think that is the way and constantly needs to be done, right? Because even when we talk about like ideology and like how folks like start maybe dividing and have divides that we don't take the time to principally work through and try to like come back into alignment with, is something that we've seen over the decades, right? And like all of the splitting and stuff that ends up happening, and not that those things aren't needed to happen, but sometimes those things I think can be avoided. And it has to be in this moment. Like we have to be willing to work even harder to struggle with each other so that we can have unity, because that's the only way we're really gonna like be able to kick back this beast, which is getting stronger and stronger and stronger, and it's really overwhelming and scary. So I'm feeling like you might be helping me with some timekeeping and time management. Was there anything else? So I'll stop there. I actually need a bio break, so I'm gonna, if you don't mind, take some time. So the first book was such a struggle to find the time with all of the work, and then the and then parenting, especially with little people, that I held up the, first of all, I was one of the editors in the beginning, and that fell to the wayside. And then my contribution to the book was holding the book up to the point where Kali, as a I say feminist ally, was like, let's figure out another way to do it and have an interview. And so I was able to get interviewed and then look at it like, let me make some edits afterwards. And that's how, you know, that was my piece in the first book. And so I felt really, really compelled, especially since I have like a academic background, to write something. And thanks to both, you know, to Kali again, but also like you, Matt, that when I talked about what it was that I wanted to contribute, not only were you like, you have to, you were like, what you're saying makes a lot of sense and it's missing and it's needed. And so, you know, I like pushed and pushed and pushed to be able to write the article that really is a reflection, and I had to revisit several times to kind of like pull out the reaction part and the ego part, because it's very much in response to criticism that was being waged at a point of the work that did end up in some splits, right? So I'm no longer a member of the Malcolm X Grassroots movement. At the same time, like that is what my introduction to, not my introduction to like being a part of the movement, but my introduction to like actively working in the U.S. on this, in this area. So that part you guys can read. The interview one is still in here, which is really focusing on housing. I mean, the other part of it is like, there wasn't another woman within Cooperation Jackson's contribution, right? And so like, I felt like I was gonna be the one to do that compared to other folks who were members and participants. And so, so I had to do that for myself, and because it made sense. And so, yeah, like Matt said, you can read different things, but I really feel the last time I talked about the book, I had to skip the whole reading part. So bear with me because it's not only a paragraph. And so the article piece, I'll let you read. This is a piece where I was like, there's some creative writing and there's some like random ranting that I've had on airplanes and whatnot. And so I was glad to be encouraged to do this like free flow creative part in the book. And so it's called A Beautiful Struggle. And it's my continuous learning in the past, the present, and the future. So I'm gonna skip around. So I grew up with gunshots and people I knew shot. I was in it, but not of it, in a protective bubble. We've created that bubble for now. Who knows what the future holds? And when I say that, I'm not saying what Kali said, like the bubble of we're gonna have this enclave and make it beautiful and utopian and then just, you know, not care about the rest. I'm talking about a bubble for our kids in this environment. Gun culture in the Deep South is on a whole other level, and my lightweight pacifist self knows the value of self-defense. Increasingly in the US, what feels more and more like the wild, wild west. I had community, I had people looking after us, a village, each place we lived. A blessing, a feeling that I wanted to give. My childhood was a lot rougher than A&T have had. So far, I literally think about Armageddon in their lifetime, and I never did as a kid. And yet they've spent their formative years like me, living in the hood, neglected and divested, burned out, people smoked out neighborhood. I hadn't imagined that for them. Not sure what I imagined. I didn't spend time thinking about it before them. Really didn't think about it when I had her, then him, until I questioned, what the hell was I doing? What are we doing to our family with this movement lifestyle? Their 8+ years in Jackson have been drastically different and still similar to me in community. Hearing, seeing, living a variety and even more than me, cooperative housing, Fannie Lou Hamer community land trust, worker cooperatives, solidarity economy, economic democracy, membership meetings, planning meetings, toys circled up for a kids only meeting. Actions, farming, that's called freedom, land and liberation, revolution like IAT. Build and fight, I hope they get that part faster than me, and in that order. Planting life, like I planted a tree in NYC, Tompkins Square Park specifically. Last year I wrote, I've had to make some tough choices, damn near impossible choices, and when I feel like quitting instead of Harriet's gunshot on my back, I don't think about turning back, I choose me. I choose me for the we. Yes, Jill Scott, one is the magic number. How could I choose self-care so unapologetically that I forget the we? We better struggle and love principally. We better work hard and play hard and work harder. We better heal individually and collectively and be okay with anger and grief and rage as much as love and joy, pleasure and peace. I can be disappointed with you, excuse me, and you can criticize me. Emotional ranges we can identify and work through. We all better love me and choose me if we are going to do this together. I was thinking a lot about the idea of self-care, selflessness, selfishness in relationship to Black people, and even the wider social justice movements, pandemic enduring. and the American exceptionalism and individualism that permeate our lives. There is a line between practicing self-care and masking, between putting oneself over the well-being of our comrades and being disciplined in this work of self-care. It may not be as thin of a line between wearing a mask in a pandemic or having a black skin with a white mask, but think about it. Thinking of masks in different forms even reminded me of a time I journaled when I was a teen about feeling like I wore a mask of smiles and confidence outside in everything I did, and took it off once I was inside, at home, and even then, not always fully. I've been told many times at different points in my life, in order to take care of others, you have to take care of yourself. I believe that, and 9 times out of 10, it's been true. And still, there are some times where in order to have the oxygen mask on so I can take a breather, a full exhale, I've had to volunteer to get them ready quick and in a hurry, do things for them along the way they are more than capable of doing, do things I complain about on any other day to get them up and out of the way. I mean, what if the conditions of a plane that require those oxygen masks to drop means you have very little time, and doing what they say not to do gives your little person or people a higher risk of survival? I've thought of that in multiple scenarios in my life and work, and I've chosen, in my head at least, to sacrifice my oxygen mask and hold on tight. What are you willing to sacrifice to make sure life survives, and more than that, thrives differently? Thanks.
We're gonna go quickly into Q&A, but I'll just say to bring the loop for those who came in a little late, and Colleen and Saki came in a little late. I did suggest that you really should have been a co-editor of this book, and I mentioned your pieces in the book, and I'm so glad that you read some, and we got to hear them here, and you can see the rest of them there. You know, it seems that this thing about comradeship, organization is one thing. So Malcolm X Grassroots movement is one thing. But for example, one of the comrades that we all got to know and know each other in the building of MXG and allyship and solidarity with it is Kamau Franklin, who everything Jackson. We're all just named Jackson. Kamau Franklin, who now is central. You know, Kamau Franklin is central to the Stop Cop City work, which people know about clearly in that space. And I mention that because of MXG, and organizations change and sometimes evolve, but camaraderie hopefully builds. And so Kamau's in this book, a chapter from him, about how some of that work in Atlanta before Stop Cop City was the thing it is now, but nonetheless in building that work in Atlanta is part of this book and part of the conversation. So now we say to all of you comrades here in the room, old, or not so old, or brand new, and just meeting you now. Let's have about a half hour for dialogue, questions, comments, and all that. So who's gonna start us off?
Thank you guys. I really appreciated all of your presentation. So, I'm sort of thinking about this idea that you threw out there. We're not sort of satisfied with building little bubbles or, retreat centers or utopias, however you frame it. Sort of in face of what's going on in the world, and really just thinking about the moment that we're living through right now. I say, without trying to exaggerate or anything, I think we're witnessing a genocide right now going on in Gaza. And this is not the first one that humanity has seen, and quite likely if we allow this system to continue, it probably won't be the last. We're also looking at really a do or die moment for the ecology. This year is on track to be the hottest year on record, and it's like going after year where records continue to get broken. So basically, I bring all this up as a way to sort of probe the question, how do you see this particular where you guys have put your efforts into building up Cooperation Jackson, getting the land, building this infrastructure to a larger revolutionary change, a larger transformation of this entire society. Help sort of connect the dots. You know what I mean?
That's the next book. No, but I'm on a serious tip. I have been trying to work on another piece that tries to address some of this question and I think deals with some of the serious mischaracterization, I think, of our work that has come from, various forces on the left. Let me start by saying there is no one way that we're gonna just get our way out of this situation, right? We all just need to organize, trade unions and, take over all the, or unionize, let alone take over, unionize like that. Okay, that's what you want to do. I ain't gonna oppose you in doing that, right? But you can't tell me that that's gonna deal with everything. And likewise, I can't tell you what our method is going to deal with every single thing, right? We got a ton of gaps that we can kind of identify. Whether we weak here, we want to do better there, X, Y, and Z. But what I will say in terms of, I think where I do think we kind of on the right path is starting on the local to build deep power and deep community as a key transformative element, and building various types of just worker self-organization, right? And I'm not, co-ops could be one way, but there are many ways to do that level of worker or community self-organization. Like, I think on that part, we are definitely on the right path. And why do I say this? So, we've been very clear from the beginning that we wanted to do, for instance, we've been trying to do a union co-op kind of alliance. And in Jackson, amongst the public sector workers, amongst the teachers, amongst some of the truck drivers, we have had at different points in time a lot of unity with those forces, right? The rank and file workers, we in with y'all, support us, help us, give money. I mean, all in. The union bosses, forget about it, right? Like, we will oppose, they will block, they will, do X, Y, and Z. And so we've been trying to be very clear, like, okay, from an organizational perspective, we still gonna talk to the union bosses, but we're gonna do all our work, primarily of joint community work, with those workers who wanna work with us in those cases, and then try to subtly influence, like, don't just think about a new contract, think about taking the damn thing over, right? Like, democratize the whole piece, right? Like, we can go a little bit more deeper than people are, y'all interfering in our affairs, and this is not our model, and like, well, your model ain't working. Even by your own standards, by your own criteria, it's not working. And not to say that we're perfect, but at least, there's a transformative element that could be put in place if we actually own and control the means of production. Or have y'all forgotten that? So that, like, that particular piece, I think that we are on the right path towards. And one of the big arguments that we've been, the piece that Saki mentioned about build and fight, is my view. I don't know if there's, I would say it's not an organizational view, but it is my view and it's my argument that I don't like this term, but I'm gonna use it, like the social movement left. We got a whole bunch going on, a tremendous amount of activity going on. Mm-hmm. When you actually stand back and you look at, like, all the little projects that everybody's doing, we got a ton of shit going on that actually represents the majority of people in this empire in different ways. We have no fucking coordination. So we can't do any level of planning, we can't do any level of strategizing, we have no coordination. And deeper than that, we don't have any political clarity or humor. So there has to be, to me, it's like, okay, let's start by figuring out, I'm not trying to change your views or your ideology, but I do want to engage with you on a solid set of practices together so that we can get into a habit of, you know, let's act our way into new ways of thinking together rather than trying to like do it the other way around, right? And that's what that piece of y'all seen from us, that we do have a level of unity around saying like, look, there's a set of practices, mutual aid, striving for food sovereignty, worker self-organization, you know, community production was the element we trying to, you know, force into a broader kind of conversation that we've learned ourselves from some comrades, you know, up in Detroit. And then like people's assembly, that being the baseline of a collective set of practices that we could all do, that then we can kind of like coordinate, plan, aggregate with each other to be able to not only fight back, to be in a better position, you know, to mount a more front of assault against what's going on. That's what we would answer and contribute. And it's not like I'm telling you how to do it in your area. I'm just saying, like, however y'all gonna do food production or food sovereignty work in San Francisco, that's for San Francisco to figure out, right? But think about it as an aim and objective, right? And then we can talk about, well, how do we, if we can and we need to, how do we trade between Jackson and San Francisco in a way that bypasses some of the logic in the supply chains that are dominated by the institutions of capital right now. Like, that's the level I think that we need to be going at, to be able to seriously think about a solution that's not some academic abstraction.
Let me piggyback that for a second. Thank you. Yeah, we can applaud that because that's amazing. Just to piggyback that for a second. So I think put in slightly different terms, this whole question of speed in terms of your question, what things are urgent and are emergencies and what things take time. And there's a dialectic in understanding that because there are emergencies and there are urgencies, but not everything can be done in a minute.
Right.
So organizing takes time. But the framework that Kali and Corporation Jackson, Kali just laid out in Corporation Jackson organizationally, not just the one cult leader lays out operationally, is looking at that framework in a way that understands, on the one hand, we've got a problem in the US left, but on the one hand, I wouldn't say social movement. For me, it's been laid out as the NGOification, right?
I was trying to be nice.
It's this, I know, but call it what it is. It's, this creation of our left, which I put in quotes, right? As these NGOs that are fine social change-ish spaces, but aren't radical organizations and are barely even reformist, certainly not effective reformists. And then you have a left, a very clear left. Every one of us knows the right answer. If you just listen to us, then what? The revolution will come tomorrow. And the fact is, a left, an ideological left that is not in a dialectical engagement with reality and or in conversation with others is a problem. It is, to me, those two problems in what the US is about. And I don't think Corporation Jackson has all the answers to those problems, but again, the framework that they've laid out and the space, the networking space, it's not like, again, Saki just said, she's not a member of MXG anymore, and some people are, and Kamau, whose last name is Franklin, has a slightly different perspective, and other comments in this book and other comments in this room. That dialogical approach, that dialectical conversation about building the people's assemblies towards the people's strike, and that experiment, which was not exactly all we wanted to be, but was an attempt at something.
Right.
And then I guess the last thing I want to say in terms of the question that was asked, so, I was deeply and still am deeply a part of a group of folk that are not only, but they have been intensively East Coast based, Panther-led, the Baba Sekou Odinga, Dekwi, Kioni Siddiqui, Jihad Abdul-Hamid, Jaleel Muntaquim. What is that noise?
The phone ringing.
Okay, that's a phone that has a frog. It's a frog phone. Please shut that off. Anyway, in 2021, a group of us came together, Spirit of Mandela Coalition, that took up the 70-year call from W.B. Du Bois and others saying, we still charge genocide. And that genocide is not just a thing. And absolutely. I mean, look, genocide has a particular meaning in terms of international law and a certain type of definition. What is happening in Gaza now is absolutely genocide. There's no question about it, I think, in any realistic evaluation of what that word is defined as on an international level. But I think also of interest, and I'll say this, Mireille Fanon, the president of the Frantz Fanon Foundation, if you didn't see it, just wrote something in the last several weeks that talks about looking at the international human rights definitions and the meanings of genocide and how that's applied to Palestine today and how it might best be. But Mireille was also one of the 9 jurists in 2021 that took up these charges brought by the movement in an international panel and found the U.S. guilty of 5 counts of genocide, essentially amounting to genocide, against Black, Brown, and Indigenous peoples in the U.S. Now, that's not a surprise for us, but it is a way of rephrasing, of terming in international terms what this is. Because what's happening in Jackson? It's what some would call, it's what Mireille Fanon started talking about, as a slow genocide. We're used to looking at genocide like, oh, 6 million or 12 million killed in 3 years, or oh, Gaza, lots of bombs happening in 2 months. But genocide means lots of different things, and some of the framework of looking at Mississippi, looking at Black, Brown, and Indigenous peoples in the US from an international context, including international human rights law and genocide, leads us to certain things about the urgency of the moment, and maybe certain things about the way we can redo some of our thinking strategically.
Can I say something real quick? I think that in 2 points. I wasn't here for the question, but based on what you guys are saying, it's making me think of one thing that I also I don't think I have it in here as much, but it's kind of like a drum beat or a drum that I'm trying to beat on. Is the imposition of white supremacy with this idea of urgency. That part of the urgency. And so, yes, we are in a whole different time right now. Some of the same stuff, but same stuff on a whole nother level. And there is an urgency. And at the same time, everything is urgency, right? And especially for us, because folks are tired of losing, and we do see, even though individually people aren't necessarily like the only ones who have the right answer, like it's dire. But the idea of a scarcity of time, just like we try to challenge this scarcity of resources because we know it's like actually not true. I think we have to be challenging the scarcity of time fear because we have to get it better. And so there are moments, and actually I think even in the moments where it feels that we're the most pressed for time, like we actually have to figure out when we can slow down, because I don't think we have much more time to get it righter. I don't know if anything is right or better, to give folks a better chance in the next 20, 25, 50 years. And I think, we may not get more chances to keep making those same mistakes. And the interpersonal part of it is so much at the root of where we don't spend the time. And I'm not saying like end up spending so much time with like mushy stuff, but there's got to be a shift in how we also relate to each other, not only to Mother Earth, because that is the only foundation for how we're gonna sustain ourselves and the work that we're talking about trying to do. And so, a couple of years ago, especially with the horribleness, but the opportunity during COVID was like, let's spend some time to slow down. And, I feel really strongly about that. And the NGO part of it is just like this comfortness and knowing how to do what folks have been doing well for long, that feels like success and feels like victories, I think is a really, and actually getting boxed in by that framework is an issue. And this idea, like I'm having a hard time with the generation that's after me, I guess, that this idea that we've been things have been withheld for us for so long that the only way of really asserting and affirming our humanity and our value is to have our work valued with dollars, right? And so there's this idea of like how we have to be compensated that I think is starting to go overboard, because we're losing this idea that existed before where we could have a 9 to 5 and all this other work is after or a part of or a weekend of, right? And so like, yeah, and I think we have, like, I think the only way that we can push back on that is not only saying it in a space where people hear it, but like, we gotta start saying that to each other and challenging each other and ourselves when someone wants to ask for a certain amount of money to give a lecture, you know, or to show up and talk. It's like, how is that not taking on the values that you're talking about is a problem? I don't know how we shift away from that, because it's shifting so far, but like, we have to.
Let's take maybe 3 or 4
Yeah, at
questions
the same
together so
time.
we can take
Yeah.
it. Let's hear from 1, 2, I don't know, you wanna pick 3, 4? 1, 2,
Yeah,
3, 4. All right, let's see all 4 of them and then y'all can.
but then we will do the other 2, I think. If there were 6 hands, let's do 4 and then
There
make
was
sure
one
that the
six. There
other.
was one, I think
Yeah,
there
we're supposed
were-
to be out of here in 12 minutes, just so we're sure.
Okay,
Yeah.
all right.
Let's just do the
Okay.
4 and then we
We'll
can do
figure it
stuff informally.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Thanks. Yeah, just keeping it brief because there's a lot of people that want to ask questions. I've worked with the SFCLT and various CLTs here for like a decade or so, and we just formed like a California CLT network. And I was wondering if Mississippi State had something similar.
Just say what CLT is for those who don't.
Oh, sorry. The CLT is like the Community Land Trust, which, as I understand it, the Jackson Cooperative is based in that model. So like here in San Francisco, there's a San Francisco Community Land Trust. There's a Bay Area Community Land Trust that's in Berkeley. There's an Oakland community. So like in the last, I don't know, 5 or 6 years, there's been like 8 or so popping up just in the Bay Area. Like there's one in Marin. And like more people are forming them as they become more conscious of the model. But it's basically like, you know, buying housing on the open market, creating a co-op, and like keeping the residents there and putting together an LLC.
Short answer is no.
What's that?
Short answer, Mississippi is no.
Not answer. Well, yeah, but so you guys don't have one yet? Would you? Because I was
Not
We
with
have a
other,
CLT,
there's
there
only
aren't-
really 2
there's-
co-ops.
in
one-
the state so far.
Like really
Oh,
only 2,
that I
I mean,
know.
really only 2 LCs,
Right.
like in the state.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
Well, because you mentioned like cross information, so I was just wondering if I could add you to the list if like you were interested.
Yeah. We're in relationship nationally, and in the
so
Senate, but not
I
in
do
Mississippi.
want to thank Kelly and Saki very much for your thoughtfulness, your reflectiveness. That's very refreshing, and so first that. And in particular, Saki, I don't know if I'm saying it right, but you know, to bring in the issues of mothering, parenting, women's role, I mean, that is tough, and I really appreciate your raising them. I am wondering if you could speak a little bit more to other women or non-binary people in your community and how how the struggle goes beyond you, which was very helpful to hear yours, but how does it connect?
3 and 4.
Saki said that one of your parents is from Haiti, and I was curious about if there are like stories from that parent about Haiti that like you bring over into your organizing and your practice now, and like if you're able to connect any of the global issues to like what's going on in Jackson, and like if they inform each other or if like they've helped, or like these lessons or stories.
And the last question for this round.
Me?
Yeah, get it.
Oh, okay. Hi. I'm Finn. First of all, I want to say over the last few years, everything I've learned about Cooperation Jackson has been like a beacon of hope for me politically. So I really appreciate the work that you guys have been doing there. And so this is in response to a thing that Saki said about getting people to see themselves as leaders. And this is kind of coming from my work in a worker cooperative myself. And so when you said that, that really hit something for me, and I do spend a lot of time trying to mentor people, and I find that a lot of my coworkers, particularly the ones from working class backgrounds, particularly people of color, really identify as workers, and it's like I have a hard time kind of getting to people in that way. So I'm wondering if you guys have words of advice around ways you've succeeded with that. And right now, it's interesting you brought up the like co-op union, working together. Because in my mind, I've been like, I need to get with a union and get a union organizer to help support me to do this. But that's not materialized. And I think it's probably for some of the reasons that you cited. But that's my question. Thank you.
Oh, yeah, those are mostly me. I'm trying to jot down.
Good catch.
So I'm gonna go backwards because I didn't actually write down the question, the second question. I don't, there isn't like a way. I think that what I'm looking at even more now, one is the continuing practice and the practice of, getting the boss out of our head. And I think the other part though is like making the space and the conditions for people to contribute in different ways that they are able to, and for even us that are like the leaders or leaders to see that as a contribution, right? And so it may not be like people may be silent when it's like, what do we want to do with this? But there are other ways to engage, and I think even on like how we like organize, like even how meetings are held. And so I can share more later. There's a cooperative leadership certification program, and I'm struggling with it because it's very white. And at the same time, the different tools and the way that they have organized things seems like it's more work. And at the same time, it does open up space, I think, for it to be more participatory. Yeah, so that's a model that I think is interesting to look at, and there are ways that we do it, but I don't think we necessarily do it consistently, right? And so if you are always jumping in when you don't see other people jumping in, then how is that gonna shift things? You said, are there stories from Haiti that I grew up with?
Any
Like, I think
values?
there's just this kind of like, not necessarily big and spoken like pride of Haitian independence and revolution that I think kind of permeates. And so so I have felt like I have been destined to do this work, and I feel like sometimes when I wish that I didn't care about it so much, that I don't know, I can't help it. And that's not the same thing for every Haitian, right? But like whatever my experience has been, that is it. And the reflection of being able to go to Haiti and see similarities between Haiti and growing up on the Lower East Side and like class was huge for me. Like cooperation, like we see ourselves not only like the local part that Kali was talking about and being like hyper local, but a lot of us are internationalists and Pan-Africanists, and so we've I think done a good job of including that continuously throughout our work and when we started. And so we've been able to have exchanges where folks go places and people come here. We've even like done things remotely to be able to connect with communities where there are similarities and there's alignment and what we can learn from them. And I think that like it was really interesting to be able to see people who just come in and take part of it. I think it resonates because sometimes I'm like, are people gonna be like, oh yeah, that's similar or whatever? But like, it does. And I think it lends to folks' consciousness around it. So that like internationalism has been a part of it. Hopefully that answers the question. I wrote informal support and I wrote others, but I don't know what the second question was after the CLT.
About women.
Oh,
Women's
yes,
role
others. Right. I think it's a challenge. Like when we were brainstorming co-ops to kind of like start in this first round, One of them was around a school and childcare, and most of us in the beginning had little people, right? So I can think of 2 or 3 other women who were a part of founding the organization, and we all had very small little people, and we all wanted to figure out how we support each other and like collectively do childcare and then create, you know, like a school, and that never took off, and I think that
It was tried.
no, yeah. But you know, it ended up being like, okay, there's one person who's like deeply like, I can be kind of like the anchor to start off, because what we did was we created working groups, right? And so the working groups were like working on, you know, creating and developing this cooperative. And you know, I was clear about what my role can be and what my limits could be in terms of what I was already doing and how I could contribute, but I couldn't be the anchor to it with the role that I played in the beginning. And so yeah, and then, you know, like, so then we boiled down to how do we figure out like cooking rounds and sharing and stuff like that. And so I mean, at one point when Baba Shokwe passed away and everybody basically, like, Kali didn't have a job anymore, the kids came everywhere with us, but at a certain point we needed them to have childcare, and one of our members who was doing homeschooling like took on R2 to do homeschooling also. But even before we got there, there was an attempt by people to create like a school, and that kept falling short also because of the time I think that was needed, in addition to everything else that people were doing, to like consistently commit to developing a school that could then be run. And it's been done, so I don't know that I can completely say how come that one didn't kick off, but I think that there's still, and there's always been in our community, this very informal way of women, and especially single moms, supporting each other, and the need, because it's not enough, especially during emergencies, the need is to figure out how we formalize a network of support so that it's not, you know, ad hoc and informal, and that's also, I think, something that is bubbling now. I just recently went to this thing that's called Offers and Needs, and apparently it's like bubbling up all over the place, but like that offers and needs and how to figure out how to exchange. And for me, I was like, one of the things I'm gonna put down, I feel awkward putting it down, but I'm putting cooking down. Cause that's a struggle. But I think that like women are still holding down so much, and single women, and like the vulnerability of renting and renters. And you see, even on our block, not necessarily only in our neighborhood, like how many of the people who are like families or 2-parent homes, or like older people and older women, you know, like either own or they're able to like rent and stay stable, but there's a lot of turnaround in the housing, where like they're more susceptible in their renters, and so it's a very vulnerable position to be in, and there's still a need for us to have people see this and alternative models as a way to engage them, and to maybe even just figure out how to put in and carve out a little bit more time into them in order to then be able to like be more supported and sustainable. But it's one of the things that keeps people from being able to come to a meeting regularly, right? And so like how often you can come to a membership meeting even is a challenge. And so I think that like right now we're back to getting to where we were, but we were at a low for a period of time in terms of how many women and how many of the people in the queer community who saw our space as a safe space, and who even just like, I'm coming because I need a space to do some schoolwork and internet, like that engagement we are trying
Particularly
to,
during the
yeah,
pandemic.
it started to go down, and so we gotta figure out how we step that up, because those are the folks who need to be centered, and who we say have to be centered.
One thing I would say just on that, like, and this is something like both theoretically and practically we've been trying to figure out, is something about the social reproductive kind of labor that the second we kind of really try to formalize it, it falls apart.
Yeah.
The informal nature of it kind of lasts and sticks a little bit longer, but then there's not an appropriate way to like track it, honor it, resource it without some formalization, and we haven't figured that out yet. But it's a barrier, because like, you know, for folks to understand, like, there's no real public transportation in Jackson. So that's one thing people need to understand. And so that limits a lot of working class, a lot of like single mothers and women. Like if you don't have a car, or somebody, like you can't go to certain stuff. You don't mean that you're not interested or people not engaged, but we don't live in a walking town, or that's not what it is.
Yeah.
And so like for folks to kind of go to a meeting, it's like a deliberate, I'm going to the meeting and it needs to be productive, and there needs to be childcare, there needs to be like those type of things. And before the pandemic, we were doing better. During the pandemic, I think during one period, during the pandemic, we were doing like very, very well, and then we got everybody sick. And then after that, it just kind of, quite honestly, fell apart, to be honest, you know, like, and so it's been a rebuilding, and like, we're trying to, for me, there's a lot of questions, like, we kind of like rebounding, but it's not like where it was. It's the work productive capacity is back where it was, but like broad community engagement it hasn't returned in the same way. And we're trying to figure like, was this the new normal, or like what more do we need to do, or what aren't we doing right? We're trying to figure that out. And I'm not, part of it I think is like there's just a new normal. And I see that everywhere. Like, you know, we were trying to, you know, many of y'all know I lived here in the Bay for a good number of years and familiar with particularly this part of the mission. I was surprised that we got here like what, 10:30? There was no food. There was no place to eat. And I was like, I remember everything staying open 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. You know, like on a Saturday, I was just like, whoa, what's really going on?
Comrades, I am sorry, we are already fairly over time. We've been told that this is the moment when the next folk are coming in and we're coming out. We have a few minutes where we can have informal conversations here. People can buy copies of the book, $20 a piece, substantially off the regular price. Please do that. Please continue the conversation into the hallway, into the afternoon. But right now, let's do one final round of applause. Thank you.